Welcome back. I'm Wavepunk, and this is day 63 of producing for a year. Okay, so a few days back, I realized I could put all my sounds onto buses, and then put those buses to go into another bus, and then have a bit crusher on that bus, so I don't have to have the crusher on my stereo out. You remember there was the episode where we built the transition going from our main Psytrance sound to our full chiptune Game Boy sound, and we kind of put a bit crusher on our stereo out, and it's a cool effect, but it also means we literally can't have anything not go through that bit crusher if we wanted to sell the effect a little bit better with some sweeps or impacts or something. And while editing that episode, I realized how I could set up the tracks so that I could have most of the sounds get bit crushed without having to have literally all the sounds get bit crushed and not screw myself over for mixing later. This episode won't really see any musical changes to the piece. This episode is more about the boring nuts and bolts of production. I start to move all these sounds into buses, beginning with the kick, but then I quickly realize this will be much simpler if I just take the time now to get organized. So it's time for the very tedious but generally kind of satisfying process of naming and organizing all the tracks in the piece. I generally like to organize my projects with drums on top, then bass, then leads, then harmonic content, and lastly, the effects. Then within each of these headers, I group channels by instrument, and then lastly by the order they are heard in the piece. It is important when naming tracks that you not name them by whatever is the most clear delineation of what the track is, but really just like name the track something that means something to you. For instance, this track I titled, quote, add more, end quote, weeks ago, so I would remember to come back to it and add more things to it. But at this point, the track has morphed and evolved to the point that I think of this sound as the, quote, add more sound. Like it's its own word now. So I named this track, quote, add more lead, end quote, even though, you know, a triangle lead is technically more informative to anyone else looking at the project. But it's just me. No one else is looking at it, so I can name it whatever helps me the most. I get the organization mostly done, and now it's time to put everything on a bus so we can do that bit crusher effect. But wait, there is MIDI missing out of the build base. Hey y'all, quick cameo here from Future Punk. Narrator Punk left something out here. What happened was, as I was naming the channels, I apparently at some point clicked the channel to highlight the channel and then named it and then wanted to delete the name I had written. But instead of deleting the name, I actually had highlighted MIDI data and I deleted the MIDI. I didn't discover that until I was too far ahead in the process for me to be able to like Control Z all the way back. So I literally just had to rebuild it, which was not that complicated. I just copy and pasted the MIDI data from one of the other basses and then adjusted the octave it was in. But I also hadn't touched this bass in a long time, so I went back and decided to tinker with the knobs and try to like tighten up the sound a little bit so it was a little bit less muddy, and then realized, unfortunately too late, one mistake led to another. I was tinkering with the wrong synthesizer. I am making so many mistakes right now, and I haven't saved recently, which is a big problem. I copied the bass information here and then expanded the channel and then went to Alchemy to edit the sound, and none of the changes I was making were making any differences because I was editing this guy. Ugh. I'm pretty sure all these changes are not things I can... Yeah. There's no way to undo the changes here in the synthesizer. I can sort of... It was just I just turned this up, I turned this up, I went to the effects, I turned these back on. Where these knobs were exactly, I'm not sure. Let's see, we can copy it from, I think, just about any of these. Reverb was at 76.5, delay was at 71.5. Yeah. Okay, is that the same now? I don't think that's right. That's super annoying though. Now we're gonna save. This is a comedy of errors at this point. I decide to listen through the piece just to double check that there wasn't anything else I had deleted without noticing. It turns out I had a few deeper mistakes though. While making changes to the Mario Tunnel sounds last week, I forgot that that channel is actually used earlier in the track. And I put a delay and a stereo spreader on this channel, so those are big changes. It definitely completely changes the sound of this kind of arpeggio at the beginning of the track. I was semi-relieved once I realized that this wasn't a mistake I had made during the process of naming the tracks. It would have been such a weird thing to somehow change the name of a track and change the sound dramatically, but it was a reminder of how careful you have to be when operating big tracks like this. I completely forgotten when I was changing that sound weeks ago that I was going to be changing the sound at the beginning. So I made a mental note of that error to go back and change that at some other time, fix that sound, but I'm just going to keep organizing the track for now. I put all the track groups into track folders so I can collapse them for easy navigation and because it kind of looks cool. In the process of making the leads track folder, I failed to click on the name text box, and instead of typing the word leads into the track name, I quickly, in rapid succession, input the commands L, E, A, D, and S into the project. Luckily, it didn't have any large ramifications, but it is how I discovered that if you just press L, it toggles whatever region you have selected to loop endlessly. Silly mistakes that lead to learning things are the best kind of mistakes. And so with that learned, we finally finish organizing things and start moving things into new buses. I highlighted all the leads and moved them all into a new bus, only to then, as I'm listening through the track, realize I had moved some things off of the Game Boy bus into the new leads bus, and they were no longer being filtered in the Game Boy section. I sat here and thought about whether I should move all of the Game Boy stuff into its own area, like geographically in the track, and so that it would be easier to know, like, these are the things that are on that bus and these are the things that are on this other bus. And I could do that, but let's just stick with this for now and see if this works well. I've been working on this for an hour now, and I still haven't set up that Game Boy filter sweep on the bus the way I was planning to, but we're so close. So after one more listen through to make sure everything is where it's supposed to be, we make a new bus for the Bit Crusher, and then we move the Bit Crusher effect over from the stereo out onto this new bus. This movement was the final mistake I was going to make for the day. The automation data didn't copy over with it, and now it was really gone. I should have just made a new Bit Crusher on the bus and then used the old Bit Crusher as a visual reference when building the new automation, but I didn't think of that till I was basically done with the new one, and there was no point in Control-Z and everything to possibly recover automation data. We finished it all up. Sounded like this. This sounded good, but I'm struck in this moment with the thought that I really should have a high-pass sweep in this to help sell the effect more. We're going from a full spectrum sound to like a mono small speaker spectrum sound. So I build that effect. It's still not as sincere an effect as I would like. What about adding like a notch sweep? Okay, can we make it bigger? There we go. That'll do for now. Now that I have this in a bus instead of the stereo out, I can actually use other effects to help this transition even better, but that'll have to wait until later. We've worked for long enough today. The track looks more grown up now with its cleaned up project file. It's a good day's work with many lessons learned. I'll see you tomorrow.